this maybe 2 or 3 times so far in my channel's history. Just for a little background on me and why I am talking about this, or why you should listen to my opinion, I suppose. I'm certainly not an expert. I do not work in politics, but I have a degree in political science, and my area of expertise, my focus in political science was on international relations and foreign policy. So I was much more focused on how countries deal with one another, how nation states interact with one another, more so than domestic politics during my 4 years of political science education. And today I want to touch on a geopolitical topic that I've kind of been digging into very recently. It isn't really an area that I studied in school. In school, I really focused on Eastern Europe and China. 2 of my big papers, I wrote about one about the Kosovo conflict, and the other one was something that I've presented on this channel already, which was the geopolitics of green energy and how that ties into the tensions between the United States and China. But I've been digging into this topic recently, and that is the rise of India on the geopolitical stage. And I've been endlessly fascinated by this topic, so I'm just compiled some of my notes and research that I've been looking at over the last few weeks and months. Again, not an expert, I'm just somebody with a little bit of knowledge in the field and a lot of interest, and I try to present things as unbiased and as uninflammatorily as possible. I try to, offer a fair point of view on this topic and approach it very neutrally. So I'd appreciate, especially in the comment section, if, let's keep negative comments to ourselves, things like that. So I've broken this up into 3 sections. The first section, I'm just calling it the introduction to the rise of India. The second section is the geopolitics of India, and then the final section is just some potential drawbacks or negative factors that India is facing. So we're going to get into the intro here. In recent years, India has been front and center on the geopolitical stage, and if you're a similar age as me, or I imagine if you're a bit younger than me, you've seen India rise from a country that really not that many people were talking about, especially in the Western world, in the United States and Canada, to one that you're now probably hearing quite a bit about. And if you're maybe curious why we're hearing so much about India recently, or why it seems that they've become more important all of a sudden, I hope that perhaps this video will help you a little bit. As of 2022, India is now the 5th largest economy in the world, and by 2030 it is projected to be the 3rd largest economy in the world, behind only the United States and China. And for me growing up, the only thing things I really knew about Indian culture. I knew a little bit about Hinduism. In more recent months, I've delved more into Hinduism. I find it a very fascinating religion, and as I've done more research into religion and spirituality in general in recent months, I've been looking a lot into Hinduism. You've probably heard of Bollywood. We think of, maybe the movie Aladdin, although that's Arabia, but there's some sort of like Bengali influence in Aladdin, which is interesting, like looking at the different cultures in India and things like that. Cricket, we know about, maybe you don't know, but if you're into sports at all, cricket is massive in India. India now has the world's largest population, and as opposed to other countries with large populations, such as the United States, China, Japan, the UK, etc., India's population is young, with a median age of 28 years old. Compare this to China, where the median age is 39, and the United States, where the median age is 38. So that is a massive advantage for China. We hear a lot recently about the demographic crisis that a lot of developed nations are facing. We see this trend that as countries become richer, the people in those countries have fewer children, and then you face these problems where if you have more people who are beyond working age than people that are of working age, the economy cannot support itself. The pensions, the healthcare costs will basically flip the economy upside down, and the country could go bankrupt. It's a real crisis that Japan and South Korea are currently staring down the barrel of. The most promising indicator of India's economy is its rate of growth compared to the global average. In 2022, the United States GDP, that's gross domestic product, it's kind of just a measure of the overall health of the economy and size of the economy, grew by 2.1%. and China's GDP grew by 3%. India, on the other hand, outpaced everyone else globally with a rate of 7% growth. And I have this image here. We see that statement's not necessarily true. Saudi Arabia was the only country that grew more than India. But you compare India to all these other large economies, 3.5 points almost better than third place, Spain. And you can see outpacing China, outpacing the UK, the United States, Japan. Obviously the outlier here is Russia with a minus 6% GDP growth, but that's due to sanctions and things of that nature because of the war in Ukraine. And as you can see, we get this from businesstoday.in, and the source of their information is the International Monetary Fund World Economic Outlook. Currently, agriculture is the largest job sector in India, which accounts for 43% of the total economy. Services account for 31% of the economy, and this is where India's economic dominance comes from. India's tech services sector is booming, and India has a vibrant tech startup culture with the second most funding for startups behind only the United States. So if you have an idea, you try to get into Silicon Valley, you're maybe not successful there, well, you can look to New Delhi or Mumbai, and they might have the money there. You can set up your headquarters in India, and they will have money there for you. There will be government schemes to get you business funding, things like that. And this is just like a personal anecdote, but it seems like there's just like a strong tech culture in India in general. If you're on YouTube and you're looking up any sort of tech reviews, like recently I've been shopping for a new cell phone because my current iPhone's on the way out, so I've been looking up reviews of some different phones and things like that. A lot of these tech reviewers are Indian. They're based in India. They're giving you the prices of the phones in, they say ringa. I thought it was rupees, but I think it's like ringa. I'm sorry, I don't know the currency off the top of my head. I should look that up. But there does, it seems to me at least that there's a vibrant tech culture in India. And obviously you have the call centers, like a lot of call center jobs in India, to the point where it's kind of ubiquitous at this point, both positive and negative, right? You have the call center scammers, that whole thing, but then you have like legitimate call center jobs that are being outsourced to India, and it's, a sought after job in that country. Tech giants such as Apple, Google, and Amazon have created headquarters in India, providing thousands of tech jobs and billions of dollars to the Indian economy. And my last point of this introductory section, and kind of the point that I kind of had this eureka moment about this the other day, which kind of sent me down this entire rabbit hole. And like this thought occurred to me, and kind of is the reason I'm recording this video now, but Indian culture is finally starting to appear on the global internet, especially in tech spaces, as opposed to China, who keeps its citizens behind the Great Firewall. Indians have full open access to the internet. So that's one thing, like, I was thinking about, because you see all these think pieces, like, why isn't Chinese culture so ubiquitous for all these people? Like, why aren't we all watching Chinese movies, like all these other countries watch American movies or anime or whatever else? And a big part of that is because, the average Chinese citizen is not interacting with people digitally outside their country. Of course, there's certain people who get VPNs, things like that. They bypass the Great Firewall. But you do not have a large Chinese cultural presence on the internet. But India is the world's largest population. They do not have those same internet restrictions. And as more and more people get access to the internet in India, we're going to see them exerting that cultural power over the internet on other cultures. Maybe soon we'll be having Indian movies playing in American movie theaters, maybe. Things like that. The way that we watch anime, other countries watch American movies, or other countries have McDonald's. India might start exerting those same sorts of cultural pressures on other countries. Currently, only 49% of India's 1.37 billion people have access to the internet. But as this number grows, we'll see a further spread of Indian culture across internet spaces, one that many people in the Western world are not anticipating. See, not even half the population in India currently has broadband internets. They might have a slower internet connection, something like that, but they don't have steady, high-speed internet connection. But that number is increasing, and as that number increases, like I said, that exertion of cultural power will begin. Okay. Now I want to talk about some geopolitical factors, issues around India. The 18th G20 summit was held in New Delhi, which is in India, of course. The G20 is a meeting of the world's largest economies economies, including the United States, Canada, China, the European Union, etc. And the main points of focus for this year's G20 meeting were green energy, accelerating growth, sustainable development goals, technological advancement, multilateral institutions, and gender equality. So hosted in India, those are what we're talking about. And multilateral institutions is the interesting one there. We'll see that come up a little bit later here with regards to India. But a very interesting thing and a very interesting display of India's growing influence and power during this year's G20 summit. The African Union was inducted as a permanent member of the G20. So the G20 has permanent members, and then sometimes they will invite in other countries as like honorary guests, but they have a lower status. But this year, India insisted, they requested that the African Union was brought in as a permanent member of the G20, and they did it. They were brought in, and again, India was the one pushing for this, and they got their way. India has also become a leader in the global south, combating Chinese influence through Africa. I talked a little bit about this in my Geopolitics of Green Energy video. Go check that out if you haven't seen it, but China uses what they call their Belt and Road Initiative to garner goodwill and influence African politics. I talked about there, like all but 2 countries in Africa have very favorable opinions of China and refuse to recognize Taiwan as an independent nation. But India is starting to step on China's toes a little bit now through Africa. Notably, during the COVID-19 pandemic, Indian-produced vaccines were distributed for free throughout Africa. India also hosted the Voice of the Global South Summit, which was led by the Prime Minister of India, Modi, and featured countries such as Iraq, Algeria, Bahrain, Belarus, Libya, Syria, Venezuela, and others. And the aim of the summit was to achieve unity of voice, unity of purpose in the global south. So trying to bring these countries together and find common ground in a region that is, strife with conflict historically and currently. You might have heard of BRICS before. If you haven't heard of BRICS, or maybe you have heard of it but you're not sure what it is, it's more theoretical than real. That might be controversial. Some people really buy the whole BRICS thing, but I am of the mind that BRICS is barely an alliance, and it's more of just a facade, really. I don't BRICS. The BRICS member nations, which are Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and then now recently Saudi Arabia, they kind of are forming this like anti-US, anti-European Union coalition, right? That's like the whole point, is to combat Western influence throughout the Eastern Hemisphere and the global South. And in theory, okay, these countries would be interested in bolstering themselves against the West, but they're struggling to cooperate with each other. They can't agree on anything. Xi Jinping didn't even show up to last year or this year's meeting. He pulled out the last minute. The whole thing is, in my opinion, BRICS is a complete non-factor. I don't think it'll ever lead to anything substantial. Certainly nothing that can rival the EU, because the EU is very cohesive. But BRICS has been a looming specter over the Western world for the last few years, although little has materialized from the alliance, and I'm using air quotes there. But instead, US and India ties are stronger now than ever before, with President Joe Biden and Prime Minister Modi stating that they are two pillars of a free and open Indo-Pacific. There's a statement between those two leaders, and I'll read that again. Two pillars of a free and open Indo-Pacific. A few more things here. Following the assassination of Jamal Khashoggi, relations between the United States and Saudi Arabia hit a low point. Saudi Arabia threatened to drop support for the US dollar. Saudi Arabia lowered oil production to impact gas prices in the United States. And Prime Minister Modi mediated between Saudi Arabia and the West, but specifically the United States, because there's tension with Saudi Arabia and other Western allies as well. But and there's now a fairly famous photo of Mohammed bin Salman and President Biden shaking hands with Modi between them, with his hands sort of on top of their hands. And here's that photo. You can see there's Mohammed bin Salman on the left, President Biden on the right. They're shaking hands, and then Modi has his hands over top of both of theirs, kind of mediating between them. And this was seen as a massive moment to people in the political sphere, and this really showed the level of social and political influence that India is getting now. And Saudi Arabia and the West have started to open up more lines of communication following this event. Now, something I want to talk about, and this is directly a counter to China on behalf of India, but India is approving a project they call the India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor. Not the easiest thing to say, kind of a mouthful, but it is a planned economic corridor that aims to bolster economic development by increasing connectivity and economic integration between Asia, the Persian Gulf, and Europe. So basically, India in the middle will open up lanes of trade and monetary flow between Asia, the Middle East, and Europe, with India in the middle as a mediator. And if you think about that, that's going to lead to massive economic gain in India, being in the middle of all that trade from these very powerful economic countries. And this initiative is viewed as a direct counter against China's Belt and Road Initiative, which I mentioned earlier. And this India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor has the full express support of both the United States and the European Union. We have a quote here. We're moving into some talks here about India's military and how their military is starting to integrate globally, and then maybe some of what we can deduce based on that integration. There's a quote here from the current Secretary Boston, and it says the United States and India are operating and coordinating more closely together than ever before. India has also started to conduct joint military exercises with Japan and have discussed military cooperation with China. Many countries are trying to garner the favor of India, notably the United States, China, and Russia kind of playing tug-of-war a little bit. And the United States has recently included India as a member of their Indo-Pacific Defense Vision alongside Australia and Japan. Now, if you know geopolitics, a country aligning itself militarily with the United States, with Japan, and with Australia sends a very clear message about their aims. If you're tuned into that sort of thing, Japan, at that point India is expressly sort of anti-North Korea. Australia's military is very focused on countering China in the South China Sea. That is one of the main things Australia's military is set up to do. Japan frequently has skirmishes with the Chinese Navy. So if you're looking at that, India aligning itself with the US, with Japan, with Australia, that seems to be pointing towards a position antagonizing China. And speaking on that, India's gains economically and militarily and politically have come at the expense of China and Pakistan. And although many look to India as a pillar of stability in that region, their geopolitical rise could trigger responses from China and Pakistan, perhaps leading to more instability and increased tensions in the region. And just the last point on this, Japan's expanded partnership with India is expressly focused on building a resistance against the Chinese presence in the East and South China Sea. India's deepening relationship with Australia is also focused on, it has India and Australia's military cooperation. They say it's built on 2 points. That first point is maritime security initiatives, which is a very vague statement. What exactly does that mean? You're trying to keep the sea more safe, I suppose, but it's a very vague statement, which a lot of political statements put out by governments are purposefully vague. But the second point is a lot less vague, and I'll tell you why. The second thing India and Australia are cooperating on is countering militarization in disputed zones of the Pacific. That's a very pointed statement. Countering militarization in disputed zones of the Pacific. Well, what are the disputed zones of the Pacific? Who is disputing them? That is all China. Beijing is heavily involved in the Pacific disputed zones, and China has expressly stated that they believe India is singling out China's interests and trying to undermine their interests, and Chinese leadership has warned India of conflict and confrontation should these military initiatives come to fruition. And some Western powers are concerned that this could force China's hand into invading Taiwan to improve improved their geopolitical position, and it has pushed China and Pakistan closer together. Now for our last little bit, our conclusion here. These are potential drawbacks that India faces, or some roadblocks that might get in their way that prevent them from reaching the heights that it seems like they're all but destined to reach. One major drawback of India's economy is a total lack of exports, and that is where China's economic dominance comes from. We all know made in China. India is ranked 18th for global exports. Despite housing the world's largest population, India accounts for only 2% of global trade. 2%. That is nothing. In another comparison to China, we have to look at how much money people in the country are making, and a lot of people in India are still really poor. India's per capita income is only $7,000. Compare that to China, it is $19,000. Let me look up the US's real quick, I'm not sure. Just as a comparison. Yeah, in the US in the US per capita income is $70,000. In China it's $19,000. In India it's $7,000. So India's per capita income is 10 times smaller than the United States. Adding to that, India has a history of turbulent and inconsistent government, and their recent stability is an outlier in their 75-year history of independence from the British Empire. You have to remember, Indian independence is very new. Like, my grandma, India became a independent nation in my grandma's lifetime. That's how new it is. India also has a massive unemployment problem, especially for highly educated young professionals who do not want to work in agriculture or construction. India is one of the only advanced economies in the world where the rate of unemployment increases the more educated you are. So, the more school you've done, the less likely you are to get a job. The unemployment for college graduates in India is around 15%, and the Indian job market has been described as a pyramid with a very narrow top. And that's why you see a lot of college graduates leaving India. They immigrate to New Zealand, Australia, the United States, Canada, the UK to go make money there where they can actually get a job, get a work visa, things like that. So that is potentially a major concern. What is a major concern, but it could be a major factor if India does not reach the position we think they might. Gender inequality is also a massive issue in India. Only 20% of Indian women are in the workforce compared to 70% of men. And women make up 48.5% of the Indian population. So of almost half the country, only 20% of that half is working, which isn't good. You know, most United States, I think it's like 60% of women are in the workforce. Most other countries are between 40 and 70, so not great. Only 20%. It's one of the lowest of any developed nation. And the alarming thing here is that the rate of women entering the workforce numbers is actually decreasing. Or if you look at other countries, that number is increasing. So in India, fewer women are getting jobs every year. Or if you look at like China, Russia, South Africa, more women are getting jobs every year. And that is because gender roles are strongly entrenched in Indian society and culture, and to this point the government seems completely disinterested in taking any initiatives to combat those gender roles. And I have a quote here that says, India's strong economic indicators mask the depth of its social problems. There's also a massive inequality in the education system in India. There's many instances of children completing their education, and they'll graduate school, they won't be able to do simple addition, subtraction, they won't be able to read or write. You know, if they're living in a more poor area of the country, despite going to school every day for years, they're just not learning. Indian cities are also some of the most polluted cities in the entire world, and we know that polluted environment, high rates of pollutants, is bad for people's health. It makes them less productive, they're gonna get more sick, they're gonna be more depressed, you know, it's bad all around. And part of the reason for that is Indian cities compete with one another for economic dominance, so that's actually accelerating the rate of pollution. You don't really see that so much. I can't think of that in the United States, where like cities in the same country are actively competing against one another, but that does seem to be a phenomenon in India. And that makes it very difficult for the government to implement green initiatives because the economic factors aren't there for it. It makes more sense for them economically to ignore the green initiatives, attract more workers, etc. to their city. And finally, the last point here is high levels of tension within India socially. Hindu nationalism is an issue. The targeting of ethnic and religious minorities, it's a major social and political issue. We saw that big issue in Kashmir. I believe that was this year or last year, I'm not sure, but there's been some protests, rallies, things of that nature across India, social unrest. And many people outside of India and some inside of India have accused Prime Minister Modi of democratic backsliding, which means making a country less liberal, small l liberal, not capital L liberal, less democratic, and they've accused him of eroding social and political institutions to further his own power. So in conclusion, I believe that India is uniquely positioned to join and even rival the world's richest and most powerful nations, but really I think the only thing standing in their way, the only potential speed bump in the road, is themselves. Thank you guys so much for watching. I know this isn't the usual sort of thing I post, but I like to mix it up. You guys know that, and this is a topic I am deeply, deeply interested in. I hope you found this interesting. Maybe you learned something. I don't know. If you have anything to add, if you think there's anything I was just dead wrong about, if you have your own opinion on this matter, I'd love to hear your feedback in the comments down below. If you liked the video, please leave a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel for more content,